Hello, and I know what you're thinking. Quite the audacious claim, and I'm aware of that. When I say that this series that I'm going to talk about is the most influential, I am saying that from the very limited perspective of my perspective. Now, I like to think that I am adequately read in modern fantasy and fantasy in general. I am severely lacking in certain things that I hope to rectify, and certainly when it comes to kind of post Tolkien, pre Jordan fantasy, I am lacking incredibly so, and hence why this video exists. I am attempting to fill those gaps, if you'll indulge me. And one such thing that I have been reading to fill said gap is the Elric Saga. By Michael Moorcock. For anyone who's read Moorcock, they're going to know exactly what I mean. For those who have not read Moorcock, let it just be said that I was watching an interview hosted on Daniel Green's channel that had Brandon Sanderson and Joe Abercrombie talking. And the question was kind of broached on the idea of like, what's an author that's not widely read nowadays that was kind of fundamental foundations for modern fantasy? And especially Sanderson, but Abercrombie as well, references Moorcock as completely instrumental to the face of fantasy. And I thought, that's quite interesting. Maybe I'll pick it up. And with these re-releases that are simply gorgeous for the entire series, I couldn't really resist. I was in Canada and there it was, and I just thought I'll give it a go. The price when there's 4 books in one with nice maps, this real nice map. And yeah, I just thought, what's the harm, really? So I'm coming at this, for Elric fans pre-existing, I'm coming at this after reading only 2 of the Elric books. The first one, Elric of Melniboné, and the second one, which is actually the 8th in publication, but second in, timeline and chronology, which in this series of the reprints, they're doing it with the chronology rather than publication. And that one was called The Fortress of the Pearl. And so that's where I'm coming from. I am attempting this with that reading. So if there's stuff later on where you think you've missed an author, etc., I ain't got there yet. But if you do enjoy this, looking a bit more rather than the actual text itself, looking at the influences that come afterwards or have influenced it itself, please do please do subscribe, stick around, let me know in the comment section. So I think what I'm going to do is, essentially, this video is going to be split in half, which is going to be looking at what is in Elric that is so influential, and secondly, a review of the text itself / the Elric Saga so far, the first 2 books I've read. Because I read the first one back in September, and of course I wasn't making videos, so it wasn't talked about. There is a lot to go through in terms of influences. I'm going to limit myself to a certain amount, which will be essentially 4. I think 4 is a great amount, just to give you an idea that there is such richness within this text with ideas, imagery, magic systems that have been extrapolated and built upon by authors that have continued from them. To begin with, the biggest author at the moment in fantasy, Brandon Sanderson. Let's just get it out of the way. The Cosmere itself. The Cosmere itself is very much drawn from Moorcock. The existence of a multiverse in kind of fantasy was a novel idea, and one of the ones that very much addresses that with the terminology of a multiverse is Elric. The transferal through different forms. So I will also specify spoilers. If you don't want to be spoilers, I'm going to tell you what book it's going to be for each one, but just be careful. So the Cosmere as a whole is going to be one here. Specifically, Stormlight Archive kind of goes into it quite a bit. I've been rereading it. And in the second book I just read, The Fortress of the Pearl, it references the idea of different worlds. It essentially talks about metaphysical worlds. The idea that you've got reality that we live in, dream worlds, worlds of thought, actualized thought, which is massive in terms of, I'll get onto that later, but Spren is actualized thoughts and belief of humans is very much founded within Elric. And it talks about the same way that you've got the kind of physical world, mental world, and like the distinctions of the realms in the Cosmere and in Shadesmar, for instance, the difference between that and reality exists within this. Elric is a character who, through his adventures, finds himself travelling through these different metaphysical worlds. And as I said, that's not a gotcha type thing. That is something that Sanderson very much references. He says that the Cosmere is founded within that relationship explored. You have got Stormbringer, Elric's sword. He has a sword that eats souls and talks to him. He like growls and communicates a lust that he kind of falls in with his like kind of following of the Chaos God, and following of chaos in general. Which Nightblood, talking sword, looking to eat souls, etc. Very clearly a one-to-one connection there, which leads on to our next author, Stephen Erikson, author of Malazan Book of the Fallen. Dragnapur, Anamanda Rake's sword, is the exact same thing. Drinks the souls of people it kills, is a kind of this sword that that seems to have a kind of relationship with its wielder, etc. And yeah, the drinking of souls, etc., all very much there. We then have to look at the Tistandi in general, from Gardens of the Moon, etc., onwards. These Anamanda Rake is this kind of giant albino character, this 7 foot, 8 foot tall albino, essential like god with this sword that drinks souls. Does it remind you of anyone at all? Anyone at all here? Once again, we've got this. Another thing is that the same way the Cosmere with these realms, the Warrens and the Holds, etc., within Malazan Book of the Fallen are very much tied to the same ideology that Moorcock is using within Elric. You've also got very much Moorcock is exploring different philosophies and different places, histories, than just that kind of Eurocentric view of history that a lot of fantasy was doing. There is a lot of naming conventions, histories, and locations very much drawn from the Middle East and from all over the world, which also Erikson clearly does throughout his texts. And it feels like Moorcock kind of it's almost like he lays the foundation for the confidence to be able to tackle something on a scale and scope that Malazan is. He very much is this foundational figure. So I would say that those two, to give us specific examples, in terms of Sanderson and Erikson, these polar opposites in terms of how they approach fantasy writing, and their world building, etc., and their prose especially. But this central figure of Moorcock connects them on both sides of the spectrum. Next up, this one was very funny. In this reading the second book, spoilers for Red Seas Under Red Skies, by Scott Lynch, second book in the Gentleman Bastard series. There is a plot line that is essentially directly lifted from the second book within this series, where Elric is poisoned and forced to do a mission because the guy who is forcing him to do the mission has the antidote to said potion. Now, I'm sure that there's probably an older existing example of this that people will hark to and be able to tell me about. I do appreciate if anything I've mentioned, you think there is an older reference to it or anything that I'm not talking about. But I just thought it was so funny reading this, where I was like, I'm reading Red Seas Under Red Skies. Like, the issue of like, oh, I've been poisoned, poison will kill me if I don't do this mission because the guy has an antidote, is the exact plot setup to the second book in the Elric Saga, which I just thought was exceptionally funny. And finally, Neil Gaiman did the foreword for this, talking about his influence, and it is plain as hell to see. I mean, the second book deals with the transferal into the dream realm, which is super Stardust, super Sandman especially, and also Neverwhere, this kind of secret world fantasy, is all within this kind of Moorcock framework. And so, essentially, what I want to do when I talk about that issuing these examples is that if you are a fan of these authors or modern fantasy in general, there's such a different experience to reading something that is as influential as Elric of Melniboné, because you're essentially reading it from a dual perspective. You're enjoying the story itself, but you are also coming to a realization outside of the text, literary allusions being made, and these influences that are kind of like threading throughout the texts. That I came to the realization that one, I love reading it because of that. I love drawing these literary allusions and seeing the influence and everything, because it also gives you just absolute confidence in the fact that you don't have to rip someone off, but you can pay homage and extrapolate on someone else's ideas. It does not mean that if someone has an idea, it's locked off to you. It just means that you need to be creative in the way that you're going to address and tackle that same concept. Which I think all of these authors do, which comes to my other point. I appreciate Moorcock, but the big realization is that I enjoy the works of everyone else who has been influenced by him more than his work itself. Because these are such short, little fantasy, almost like adventure story. Not that they're not adventure stories, it's a very slow-paced, almost philosophical exploration within this second book. But because they are shorter, they don't delve into the ideas as much. They more produce it in this way where it's like, well, this is the world, and so you're perfectly drawn into it. But for instance, the work that Sanderson's doing with the hard magic system around like Shadesmar and the idea of these different realms of existence, etc., far exceeds what Moorcock has done. I think the work of Sandman goes far deeper into this kind of metaphysical reality and the concept of dreams, etc. I think Red Seas Under Red Skies is a masterpiece. And Stephen Erikson and Malazan, what he's done he has completely deconstructed the idea of the Warrens and the Tistandi, etc., and used them as an almost, like a foundation to build this monolith of creation, this kind of ridiculously wide-scoping fantasy. And that would be my main thing, is that I think if you're going to read Elric, you need to approach it from the sense of appreciation. I think for someone my age, reading the type of fantasy that I did when I grew up, I'm not going to get as much out of the reading experience as someone who grew up also reading something like Elric. There are two styles involved, and I think this is much slower and much more philosophical in its exploration of the character. It harkens back to epics such as Beowulf, such as the Odyssey, where we have kind of chapter-long meeting of an issue or a hurdle and overcoming said hurdle very quickly. It is in the sense of a narrative through line. Once you've got through the setup, everything else happens in a very speedy process. And that's not how we're taught to expect fantasy anymore. Like, epic fantasy has now reached hundreds of pages, hundreds of thousands of words, whereas this must be 80, maybe 70 to 110,000 words each book. Just in and out. Here's an idea, here's the actualization of this idea, let's dip. I really enjoyed it. Essentially, I just wanted to shout it out alongside other people, because I do think that it's something I want to do moving forward. I want to read more foundational fantasy, because I think I have a good foothold in modern fantasy now, and as a result I think I just need to expand a little. I do have a lot more modern fantasy that I want to read, but alongside that, if I can filter in something like Elric, then I think and like David Gemmell, who I've read before, etc., I think it will just give a nice diversity to the styles of fantasy that I'm reading. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, please do like, please do subscribe. Let me know if you've read Elric. Let me know if there's any other foundational fantasies that you think I should read or add to my list, etc. And as always, have a nice rest of your day.